The summer air hung warm over Chicago as the charity gala lit up the Lakefront Museum. Ladies in expensive dresses and men in tailored suits mingled under crystal chandeliers, champagne glasses clinking as money flowed toward good causes. In one corner stood James Whittaker, tall and confident in his perfectly fitted tuxedo. At 32, he already had the world at his feet, the kind of man who walked into rooms and made people turn their heads. James didn't come from ordinary money. His family had the kind that went back generations, that built universities and had buildings named after them. Growing up in Connecticut meant private schools, summer homes, and never once worrying about bills. Tonight, he was bored. These events were all the same faces, the same conversations about stocks and vacation properties. He checked his watch, wondering how soon he could politely leave. That's when he saw her across the room. Denise Thompson stood by the open balcony doors, the evening breeze gently moving her deep blue dress. At 28, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her natural hair styled elegantly, her smile genuine as she chatted with an older professor. As a graduate student working toward her PhD in education policy, she wasn't usually at events like this, but her professor had invited several promising students to network with potential donors. Their eyes met across the crowd, and something shifted in the air between them. James found himself walking over before he could think twice. "I don't think we've met," he said, extending his hand. "James Whittaker." "Denise Thompson," she replied, her handshake firm. "And no, we definitely haven't. I would remember." There was something refreshing about her, no pretense, no practiced social smile. When she spoke about her research on improving education in underserved communities, her eyes lit up with real passion. James found himself actually listening, not just nodding along as he usually did. "Most people's eyes glaze over after about 2 minutes of education statistics," she laughed. "I'm not most people," he replied. By the end of the night, they had moved to the quiet rooftop garden, talking as if they'd known each other for years. Chicago sparkled below them, the lake of vast darkness beyond the city lights. "So," Denise finally asked, "what does James Whittaker do when he's not charming strangers at charity events?" "Makes money," he said with a slight shrug. "Family business, investment banking. Not nearly as interesting as reshaping the future of education." "Everyone thinks their own life is boring," she said, looking at him thoughtfully. "I bet there's more to your story." No one had looked at James quite like that before, like they actually wanted to see past the expensive suit and family name. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly seen. "Can I see you again?" he asked as the event wound down. That night was just the beginning. Over the next weeks, Chicago became the backdrop to their unexpected romance. They had dinner at hidden neighborhood spots Denise knew about, where the food came on paper plates but tasted better than any five-star restaurant. James took her sailing on the lake, watching her face light up as she took the wheel. They spent quiet evenings in her small apartment, talking until sunrise about everything and nothing. But James kept their relationship mostly to himself. When college friends called, he stayed vague about what was keeping him in Chicago longer than planned. When his parents asked about his extended business trip, he changed the subject. He told himself it was because he wanted something that was just his, not dissected by his social circle. Deep down, though, a voice whispered that he was keeping his options open, not fully committing. For Denise, the summer felt like something from a different life. She was practical by nature, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs after her father left. She'd earned everything through hard work and careful planning. This whirlwind romance wasn't like her, but with James, she felt both excited and strangely at peace. "You're different with him," her sister Tanya remarked after meeting James at a family dinner. "Happy, but also, I don't know. Be careful, okay?" "I'm always careful," Denise replied, but the truth was, for once in her life, she wasn't being careful at all. August turned to September. The air grew cooler, and reality began creeping back in. James mentioned business calling him back east more frequently. Their time together became shorter, though no less intense. Then came the morning Denise sat on the edge of her bathtub, staring at the pregnancy test in her hands, 2 pink lines changing everything. When she told James that evening in her apartment, his face went completely blank. Not angry, not happy, just empty, like someone had wiped away all expression. "You're sure?" he finally asked, his voice distant. "Yes. I took 3 tests." He nodded slowly, got up from her couch, and walked to the window. For a long moment, he just stared out at the city. "I need some time to think," he said finally. "This is unexpected." That night, he held her close as they slept, his hand resting protectively over her stomach. But something had changed. Denise could feel it in the tension of his body, see it in his eyes that now looked everywhere but at her. She didn't know it yet, but it would be the last night they would spend together. 3 days passed with no word from James. Denise called twice, then stopped, pride keeping her from trying again. On the 4th morning, she arrived at the university library to find a man in an expensive suit waiting by the entrance. "Miss Thompson?" he asked, his voice professionally detached. "I'm Richard Hargrove, representing Mr. Whittaker." The lawyer, because of course that's what he was, handed her a sealed envelope. "Mr. Whittaker asked me to deliver this personally." Denise felt the world tilt beneath her feet, but kept her face carefully neutral. How thoughtful of him to send a messenger. Inside the university coffee shop, her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. It contained a check for $50,000 and a letter written on expensive stationery. "Denise," it began without any warm greeting. "I've had time to consider our situation. While our time together was meaningful, I'm not in a position to be a father. My family obligations and career path don't allow for it. I hope this financial assistance will help with whatever decision you make. For both our sakes, I think it's best we don't contact each other again. If you choose to have the child, my lawyer has prepared papers releasing me from paternal obligations in exchange for this support. I wish you well. James." Attached was a legal document with blank lines waiting for her signature. For a long moment, Denise just stared at the papers, her mind oddly calm in the face of such coldness. Then something inside her hardened. Without hesitation, she tore the check in half, then into quarters, then into tiny pieces that fluttered onto the table like sad confetti. The legal papers followed, ripped apart with such force that other students looked up from their books. She walked out into the ordinaire, leaving the scattered pieces behind. That evening, Denise sat on her sister Tanya's couch, finally letting the tears come. "I should have known better," she said, her voice raw. "Men like him don't end up with women like me. I was just a summer adventure." Tanya held her close. "No, honey, men like him don't deserve women like you. There's a difference." "What am I going to do?" Denise whispered, hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Whatever you decide," her mother said, joining them with mugs of tea. "You won't do it alone." Over the next weeks, Denise tried to reach James directly one final time. She wrote a letter, not asking for money or even for him to be involved, but simply telling him that she had decided to have their child and that someday this child might want to know about their father. The letter came back unopened, stamped "Return to Sender." October turned to November, and Denise threw herself into her studies with renewed determination. Her morning sickness hit hardest during her afternoon classes, but she never missed a day. In the evenings, she picked up extra tutoring jobs, saving every dollar. "You're not giving up your PhD," her mother insisted when Denise mentioned possibly taking a break to work full-time. "Your education is the best gift you can give this baby." During a December snowstorm, Denise spotted James at a distance, coming out of a downtown restaurant with an elegant blonde woman on his arm. She ducked into a bookstore before he could see her, watching through the window as he hailed a taxi, laughing at something the woman said. His face showed no signs of the turmoil that had become Denise's daily companion. That night, she deleted every photo of him from her phone and packed away the few small gifts he'd given her. "We're going to be just fine without him," she told her unborn child, a promise and a declaration of independence rolled into one. As winter deepened, Denise created new routines. She joined a support group for single mothers at the community center. She converted her small home office into a nursery, painting the walls a soft green. Her sister and friends held a baby shower where they gifted her hand-me-down clothes and gently used baby equipment. In her 7th month, during a routine checkup, the doctor asked, "Do you want to know what you're having?" Denise nodded, suddenly eager. "It's a boy," the doctor said with a smile, "and he looks perfectly healthy." That evening, alone in her apartment, Denise finally chose a name. Anthony, after her grandfather, a man who had worked hard every day of his life and loved his family fiercely. Anthony Thompson would know his worth from day one. He would know he was chosen and wanted. And someday, when he asked about his father, she would tell him the truth, but also make sure he understood that James's absence reflected James's failings, not Anthony's value. In April, with spring bringing new life to the city, Denise went into labor 2 weeks early. Her mother and sister took turns holding her hands through 18 hours of labor. When they placed the baby on her chest, tiny, perfect, with a head full of dark curls, Denise felt a love so overwhelming it made everything else fade away. "Hello, Anthony," she whispered, tracing his perfect face with a gentle finger. "We've got this, you and me." As she held her son, Denise made a silent vow. James Whittaker's money might have built comfortable lives for generations, but she would build something even more valuable for Anthony, a life rich with love, honesty, and unshakable support. A life where he would never question his place in the world. The years passed like pages turning in a book, each one filled with its own struggles and triumphs. 2 very different lives unfolded in 2 very different worlds. In a modest but comfortable apartment on Chicago's South Side, Denise juggled motherhood and her academic career with a determination that impressed everyone around her. Little Anthony grew from a curious toddler into an energetic boy with his mother's quick mind and a talent that surprised them both. It started when he was 5, during a visit to Denise's colleague who had a small piano. Anthony climbed onto the bench and began pressing keys, not randomly as most children would, but trying to recreate a song he'd heard. The adults stopped their conversation, watching in amazement. "Has he had lessons?" her colleague asked. "Never," Denise replied, equally surprised. Within months, they'd found an old upright piano at a thrift store. It was badly out of tune, with 3 keys that stuck and a bench that wobbled, but to Anthony it was magical. A retired music teacher from the community center offered lessons at a price Denise could afford, quickly recognizing that the boy had a rare gift. "He doesn't just play the notes," the teacher told Denise. "He feels them. That can't be taught." By age 8, Anthony was performing in school recitals, his small fingers moving across the keys with surprising confidence. By 10, he was composing his own simple melodies, filling their apartment with music that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. Meanwhile, across the country in a Connecticut mansion with manicured grounds, James Whittaker built what appeared to be a perfect life. 6 months after leaving Chicago, he married Victoria Bailey, daughter of a banking executive whose connections helped propel James to chief financial officer of his family's company. They had twin daughters, Elizabeth and Grace, who attended the same exclusive private school James had. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect. But late at night, when the house was quiet, James sometimes sat in his study with a glass of expensive whiskey, typing Denise's name into search engines. He never reached out, never tried to make contact, but over the years, he collected small details about her life like someone gathering shells on a beach. An academic journal with her name listed as a contributor. A newspaper photo of her receiving a teaching award. A university website showing her as an assistant professor. There was never any mention of a child. James told himself this meant she hadn't gone through with the pregnancy, and this thought brought both relief and an unexpected hollowness. He never searched deeper, afraid of what he might find. Instead, he closed his laptop and returned to his carefully constructed life, where he was increasingly successful and increasingly empty. "Dad, you're not listening again," 11-year-old Elizabeth complained during dinner one evening. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," James replied, forcing himself back to the present. "What were you saying about your horse competition?" Victoria gave him a look across the table. Later, she confronted him. "You're never really him anymore, James. Not with me, not with the girls. Where do you go in that head of yours?" He kissed her forehead dismissively. "Just work stress. The Thompson merger is keeping me up at night." But it wasn't work that haunted him. It was a decision made years ago, a letter returned unopened, a check torn to pieces. The bank had notified him it was never cashed. Back in Chicago, 12-year-old Anthony sat at the kitchen table, homework spread before him, asking the question Denise had been preparing for since his birth. "Mom, why don't I have a dad like other kids?" Denise put down the dish she was drying and sat across from him. She had promised herself she would always tell him the truth in age-appropriate ways. You do have a father, Anthony. He's just not part of our lives. Why not? Didn't he want me? The raw hurt in his voice made her heart ache. It wasn't about you. He wasn't ready to be a father. Some people aren't brave enough to face big responsibilities. What's his name? Denise hesitated, then answered honestly. James Whittaker. Anthony repeated the name softly, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. What's he like? He was smart. Good with numbers. He had a nice smile. She chose neutral facts, fighting the urge to let old bitterness color her words. But that was a long time ago. People change. That night, Anthony played his piano longer than usual, working through a piece that seemed to carry all the questions he couldn't put into words. Denise listened from the hallway, hearing both sadness and strength in the music, marveling at how much her son could express without saying a word. The next morning, she found him looking at her old photos. She'd never hidden them away after all. You look happy here, he said, pointing to one from that long ago summer. I was, she said simply, but I'm happier now with you. In Connecticut, James became CEO after his father's retirement. At the announcement party, he gave a speech about family legacy and values that received enthusiastic applause. Afterward, alone in his office, he stared at the family portrait on his desk, himself, Victoria, the twins now 13, and wondered about a face that wasn't there, a child who would be the same age now. For the first time in years, he typed not just Denise's name, but Denise Thompson's son into the search engine. A school newspaper article appeared. 8th grader Anthony Thompson wins regional piano competition. James clicked on the small photo, his heart racing. A boy sat at a grand piano, his posture perfect, his expression intense. Even in the grainy image, James recognized his own jawline, his own hands. He closed the laptop quickly, as if burned. That night, he told Victoria he was going for a drive to clear his head. Instead, he parked by the ocean and wept for the first time since he was a child, for the son he'd never known and the man he'd failed to be. Anthony's high school years flew by in a blur of piano practice, advanced classes, and the normal growing pains of teenage life. By 17, his bedroom walls were covered with certificates and competition ribbons. His piano playing had evolved from merely talented to something extraordinary. He played with a depth of emotion that brought listeners to tears. You play like you're searching for something, his music teacher said after a particularly moving practice session. Like you're having a conversation with someone who isn't there. Anthony just nodded. He couldn't explain that his music had become his way of talking to the father he'd never met. Every piece he composed carried questions he couldn't ask aloud. One evening after dinner, Denise placed a thick envelope on the kitchen table. What's this? Anthony asked, looking up from his homework. It came today, she said, her voice a mix of pride and nervousness. From Juilliard. Anthony stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. The most prestigious music school in the country. He'd applied on his teacher's insistence, never truly believing he had a chance. Whatever it says, Denise told him, I'm proud of you. With shaking hands, he tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. His eyes scanned the first paragraph, then widened. I got in, he whispered, then louder. Mom, I got in, with a full scholarship. Denise's eyes filled with tears as she hugged him tight. I knew you would. That night, after the excitement settled, Anthony sat at his piano, playing softly. Denise found him there, his expression thoughtful. What's on your mind? She asked. You should be celebrating. I was just thinking about him, Anthony admitted, about my father. Denise sat beside him on the piano bench. Over the years, she'd shared more details about James, his background, his family's wealth, his career, always careful to be truthful without being bitter. Do you think he'd be proud? Anthony asked, his voice small despite his nearly adult frame. Denise placed her hand over his. Anyone with sense would be proud of you. But honey, you earned this all on your own. Your talent, your dedication, that's all you. Anthony nodded, then asked the question he'd been holding back. Have you ever thought about trying to find him, now that I'm older? Denise took a deep breath. I thought about it, but that's a decision you need to make for yourself when you're ready. Later that night, Anthony opened his laptop and typed James Whittaker CEO into the search engine. Dozens of results appeared, news articles, company profiles, charity event photos. He clicked on an image and found himself staring at a man in an expensive suit receiving some kind of business award. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same jawline, the same hands, even the way he stood. It was like looking at an older version of himself. Anthony found more photos. James with his wife at gallery openings, with his twin daughters at their high school graduation. He looked successful, confident, content with his life. A life that had never included space for a son in Chicago. Anthony closed the laptop, feeling strangely calm. He didn't need to meet this man. He had his music, his mother, his future at Juilliard. That was enough. Meanwhile, in Connecticut, James stood in his home office surrounded by boxes. After years of building his family's company, he had made the surprising decision to step back from day-to-day operations. "Are you sure about this?" Victoria asked, watching him pack up his awards and mementos. Their daughters had left for college the previous fall, and the house felt too big, too quiet. "I've given 30 years to the company," James replied. "I want to do something meaningful with whatever time I have left." What he didn't say was that turning 50 had triggered a deep reckoning. He'd achieved everything he'd ever wanted professionally, but success had left him feeling strangely empty. His marriage had become a comfortable arrangement rather than a passionate partnership. His daughters called dutifully every Sunday, but shared little of their actual lives with him, and always, in quiet moments, there was the thought of the son he'd never known. James had started a foundation focused on music education for underprivileged youth. He told everyone it was because he believed in the transformative power of the arts, which was true. What he didn't say was that every time he funded a piano for a community center or a scholarship for a talented teen, he wondered if somewhere, someone had done the same for his son. One evening, James found himself at a small recital hall at Yale, where a former scholarship recipient was performing. He hadn't planned to attend, but his schedule had opened up unexpectedly. The young pianist was technically proficient but played with little emotion. As James applauded politely, another patron mentioned an upcoming showcase in New York featuring this absolutely remarkable young pianist from Chicago who's just been accepted to Juilliard. "A true prodigy," the woman continued. "He plays Chopin like he's lived 100 years of heartbreak." "What's his name?" James asked, his interest piqued. "Anthony Thompson. Remember that name, he's going to be famous someday." James felt the world stop. The name echoed in his head as conversation continued around him. It couldn't be a coincidence. Thompson wasn't a common spelling. That night, he found a YouTube video of a high school recital. The quality was poor, but the music was extraordinary, complex, emotional, somehow both technically perfect and deeply personal. When the camera panned to the pianist's face, James saw himself in the boy's features, in the way his brow furrowed in concentration, in the slight tilt of his head as he leaned into a particularly moving passage. His son, there was no doubt. James played the video again and again, listening to the music his son created, hearing in it all the questions he'd never been brave enough to ask, all the pain he caused by walking away. The next morning, James called his assistant. "Find out everything you can about the Young Artists Showcase at Lincoln Center next month," he said, "and get me a ticket." The Lincoln Center buzzed with excitement as people in formal wear filed into the concert hall. The Young Artists Showcase was a prestigious event featuring the most promising musical talents from across the country. Behind the scenes, Anthony adjusted his bow tie, trying to steady his breathing. "You look so handsome," Denise said, straightening his already perfect jacket. She'd taken time off work and spent money they didn't really have on a new dress for the occasion. "How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up," Anthony admitted with a nervous laugh. "That's normal," she assured him. "But once you sit at that piano, you'll forget everything else. You always do." A stage manager appeared. "5 minutes, Mr. Thompson." Anthony hugged his mother tight. "I wouldn't be here without you. You know that, right?" "You got yourself here," she said firmly. "Now go show them what you can do." In the audience, James settled into his seat in the fifth row center. He'd arrived an hour early, his stomach in knots. The program in his hands trembled slightly as he read Anthony's bio. Anthony Thompson, 18, Chicago. First-year scholarship student at Juilliard School of Music. winner of the Midwest Young Pianist Competition 3 consecutive years, will perform his original composition Unseen Connections. Around him, patrons chatted excitedly, but James barely heard them. After 21 years of running away from his responsibility, he was about to face the consequence of his cowardice. He had no plan beyond this moment. He didn't know if he would approach Anthony afterward or simply watch from a distance. He just knew he needed to be here to witness the young man his son had become without him. The lights dimmed. A poised young violinist performed first, followed by a cellist. James applauded mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Then the announcer's voice. "Our next performer from Chicago, Anthony Thompson." James leaned forward as Anthony walked onto the stage. Tall and slim in his dark suit, he moved with quiet confidence to the grand piano. James's breath caught. It was like seeing himself at that age, but with Denise's warm brown skin and graceful way of moving. Anthony sat, adjusted the bench, and closed his eyes for a moment. Then his fingers touched the keys, and everything changed. The music began softly, tentatively, like a question being asked. As it built, layer upon layer of complexity emerged: hope and longing, loss and resilience. It was the story of his life translated into sound, so honest and vulnerable that the audience sat transfixed. James felt tears sliding down his cheeks, making no move to wipe them away. This was his son, this extraordinary young man who could make people feel so deeply through his music. This was what he had walked away from. Not just the chance to be a father, but the privilege of knowing this remarkable person. In that moment, watching Anthony play, James finally understood the full weight of what he had thrown away. It wasn't just about missing bedtime stories or little league games. He had denied himself the chance to witness a soul taking shape, to be part of something truly meaningful. The success he chased so relentlessly seemed hollow in comparison. When Anthony finished, there was a moment of complete silence before the audience erupted in thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, many wiping away tears. Anthony stood and bowed, his expression both humble and glowing with the pure joy of creating something beautiful. James stood with everyone else, clapping until his hands hurt, wanting to shout, "That's my son," but knowing he had no right to claim any part of Anthony's brilliance. As the applause finally faded and Anthony left the stage, James sat down heavily, suddenly unsure what to do next. He had imagined this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, doubt paralyzed him. What right did he have to disrupt Anthony's life? What could he possibly offer that would make up for 21 years of absence? After the showcase ended, people gathered in the reception area for champagne and conversation. James stood at the edges, watching as people surrounded Anthony, offering congratulations. A distinguished-looking man, likely from Juilliard, had his hand on Anthony's shoulder, introducing him to what appeared to be potential patrons. And then James saw her, Denise, elegant in a deep blue dress, standing proudly near her son. She looked different, of course. They were both in their 50s now, but her smile was exactly as he remembered, lighting up her entire face as she watched Anthony accept compliments with gracious modesty. James's heart raced. He should leave. He should just walk away and let them enjoy this perfect moment untainted by the past. But his feet carried him forward instead, drawn by a force stronger than his fear. Anthony was speaking with an older couple when he happened to glance over and see James approaching. He didn't recognize him at first, just another well-dressed patron coming to offer congratulations. But then their eyes met, and something flickered across Anthony's face, confusion, then dawning recognition. James stopped a few feet away, suddenly breathless. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the noise of the reception fading away. "Anthony," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "My name is James Whittaker. Your performance was extraordinary." Anthony didn't respond immediately, his eyes searching James's face with intensity. "I know who you are," he said quietly. Neither of them noticed Denise turning, freezing mid-conversation as she spotted them together, father and son, finally face to face after 21 years. The reception hall seemed to shrink around them, the chatter and laughter fading to background noise. Father and son stood facing each other, 21 years of absence hanging in the air between them. "How did you find me?" Anthony asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions behind his eyes. James shifted uncomfortably. I heard about a talented young pianist from Chicago. When I heard your name, he trailed off, then added simply, I had to come. Before Anthony could respond, Denise appeared at his side, her hand protectively touching his arm. The look she gave James carried 2 decades of hurt, strength, and surprise. James, she said, his name sounding strange on her lips after all these years. Denise? He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. You look well. A small, uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Anthony, Denise said carefully, there are some people from the conservatory waiting to speak with you. But if you'd rather. It's okay, Mom, Anthony said, his gaze still fixed on James. I'll talk to them in a minute. He turned to his father. Maybe we could speak somewhere quieter. They found a small sitting area off the main reception hall, away from the crowds. Anthony sat tall, shoulders back, while James perched awkwardly on the edge of his chair. I don't know where to begin, James said finally. How about the truth? Anthony's voice remained calm, but his hands, pianist's hands, so, like his father's, were clenched tightly in his lap. Why did you leave? James had imagined this conversation countless times over the past few weeks, rehearsing explanations that now seemed pathetically inadequate. I was a coward, he said simply. I had certain expectations for my life. A plan. When your mother told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I told myself I wasn't ready to be a father. He paused. But that wasn't true. I wasn't willing to be a father. There's a difference. Anthony absorbed this, his expression giving away nothing. You sent her money, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, and some legal papers. James looked down at his hands. She tore them up. The money too. She never told me that part. Your mother is a remarkable woman. James glanced toward the reception hall, where Denise stood watching them from a distance. She raised you on her own, and he gestured vaguely toward the concert hall. Look how you turned out. She didn't have a choice, Anthony said, an edge entering his voice for the first time. You did. The words hit James like a physical blow. You're right, he admitted. And I made the wrong one. In the silence that followed, Anthony studied his father's face, looking for traces of himself, for answers to questions he'd carried his whole life. Did you ever think about me? He finally asked, his voice younger suddenly, more vulnerable. James felt his chest tighten. Yes, he said hoarsely, more than you might believe, especially in recent years, but not enough to try to find me. I convinced myself it was better to stay away. That showing up after so long would only disrupt your life. James leaned forward. But that was just another excuse. The truth is, I was ashamed, and afraid of facing what I'd done. Anthony nodded slowly, processing this. I used to imagine you, he confessed. When I was little, I made up stories about why you weren't there. Mom never said anything bad about you. She just said you weren't ready. She was being kind, James said, more than I deserved. A commotion in the reception area caught their attention. Anthony's piano teacher was looking for him, holding what appeared to be a business card. I should get back, Anthony said, standing. Of course. James stood too, uncertain what to do with his hands. Anthony, I'm not here to disrupt your life. I don't expect anything. I just wanted to see you, to tell you how sorry I am. He hesitated. Your music today, it was remarkable. Truly. Something flashed in Anthony's eyes, pride, perhaps, or a hunger for the approval he'd never had. Do you play? He asked suddenly. Piano? No, James stopped. Well, actually, yes. A little. I took lessons as a child, but never had the discipline to get very good. But you appreciate music. Very much. It's why I started a foundation for music education in underserved communities. As soon as the words left his mouth, James wanted to take them back. It sounded like he was trying to impress Anthony to buy forgiveness with charitable works. To his surprise, Anthony looked genuinely interested. What kind of foundation? We provide instruments, fund after-school programs, scholarships sometimes. James hesitated. I'd like to tell you about it sometime, if you're willing. Anthony didn't commit either way. I need to think about all this, he said instead. It's a lot to take in. Of course. Take all the time you need. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "My number. If you ever want to talk again." Anthony took the card, looked at it briefly, then tucked it into his jacket pocket. "I should find my mom." "Anthony," James said as the young man turned to leave, "I know I have no right to say this, but I'm proud of you, not because of anything I did, but because of who you are." Anthony paused, his back still turned. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said quietly. Then he walked away, back straight, head high. James watched him go, making no move to follow. Through the doorway, he saw Anthony rejoin Denise. He saw her concerned expression, the protective way she placed her hand on his back, the questioning look she cast in James's direction. He should leave now, he thought. He'd done what he came to do. But his feet remained rooted to the spot as Denise said something to Anthony, then made her way toward the sitting area. "James," she said, stopping in the doorway, "we need to talk." The reception continued behind her, people laughing and chatting, celebrating young talents with bright futures. But in that small sitting room, two people who had once loved each other prepared to face a past they had both carried for 21 years. 2 months after the Lincoln Center showcase, Denise checked her watch as she made coffee in her Chicago apartment. It was almost noon. Anthony would be arriving soon, and with him James. The thought still felt strange, like something from an alternate life she had once imagined but long ago put away. That night at Lincoln Center, after Anthony had gone to speak with his teachers, Denise had confronted James in the small sitting room. 21 years of carefully contained anger had come pouring out. "You don't get to just appear in his life now that he's successful," she had told him, her voice low but intense. "You don't get to claim any part of who he is." James had listened, making no attempt to defend himself. "I'm not here to claim anything," he'd said when she finally ran out of words. "I just needed to see him. To tell him I'm sorry. What happens next is entirely up to Anthony." Now, 2 months later, Anthony had made his decision. After several phone conversations with James and many long talks with his mother, he wanted to try. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a chance to know the man whose absence had shaped so much of his life. The doorbell rang. Denise took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was Anthony's choice to make. She opened the door to find her son standing there, looking both nervous and determined. Behind him stood James, holding a bottle of wine and looking even more uncomfortable. "Mom," Anthony said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "We made it." "Come in," she said, stepping back to let them enter. The living room was filled with afternoon sunlight. On the walls hung photos of Anthony growing up, school pictures, piano recitals, his high school graduation. James paused to look at them, his expression a mixture of wonder and regret at all he had missed. "Coffee's ready," Denise said, leading them to the kitchen. "Or there's tea if you prefer." "Coffee would be great," James replied, his voice overly polite, as if they were strangers meeting for the first time. In many ways they were. They sat at the small kitchen table, the three of them forming an awkward triangle of shed blood and separate lives. Anthony looked from his mother to his father, seeming older than his 21 years. "I've told Mom about our conversations," he said to James, "and about your offer." James nodded, turning to Denise. "I want to be clear that I'm not trying to buy my way into Anthony's life. The Foundation Scholarship is completely separate from our personal relationship. Anthony earned it on his musical merit alone." "The committee doesn't even know we're related," Anthony added. James recused himself from the selection process. Denise nodded slowly. After their initial confrontation at Lincoln Center, she had done her research. James Whittaker's foundation was well respected, known for its genuine commitment to young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. The scholarship would allow Anthony to study abroad after graduation, an opportunity he had dreamed of but could never have afforded. "I believe you," she said finally, "and it's Anthony's decision to accept it." A small tension eased from the room. They sipped their coffee, finding their way through careful conversation. Anthony spoke about his classes at Juilliard, his upcoming performances. James shared stories about his twin daughters, now in graduate school, who had recently learned about their half-brother. "They'd like to meet you," he told Anthony, "whenever you're ready." Later, Anthony excused himself to take a phone call from his girlfriend, leaving Denise and James alone for the first time since their charged conversation at Lincoln Center. "He's remarkable," James said quietly. You did an amazing job, Denise. Don't, she said, shaking her head. Don't praise me for doing what I had to do, what you should have helped with. James looked down at his hands. You're right, I'm sorry. He paused. I know it doesn't change anything, but I've told my wife and daughters everything. The whole truth, no more secrets. How did they take it? My daughters were angry at first. Hurt. My wife? He sighed. We're in counseling. It's not easy, but we're working through it. Denise studied him, seeing the changes time had carved into his face. Why now, James? After all these years, why did you finally decide to find him? I told myself it was because I wanted to make amends before it was too late, he said slowly. But the truth is, I was drowning in regret. In what-ifs. I needed to know who he became. He looked up at her. I know I don't deserve his forgiveness. Or yours. No, she agreed. You don't. Anthony returned, sensing the heaviness in the room. Everything okay? Just clearing the air, Denise said, managing a small smile. Anthony sat back down, then pulled a folder from his bag. I wanted to show you both something. He handed James a music sheet titled Bridges. My newest composition, he explained. It's about connections that remain even when they're invisible. About finding paths to each other, even after a long separation. James studied the notes, unable to read music but understanding the significance of what he held. I'd like to hear it someday. That's why I'm here, Anthony said. I'm performing it next weekend. Small venue, just a student showcase. He hesitated. I'd like you both to come. Denise reached for her son's hand. Of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it, James said, his voice rough with emotion. After James left, promising to be in touch about the performance details, Anthony helped Denise clean up. They worked in comfortable silence until she finally asked the question weighing on her mind. Are you sure about this, Anthony? Letting him into your life? Anthony leaned against the counter, thoughtful. I'm not sure of anything yet. But I think I need to try. Not for him, but for me. He looked at his mother. I'm not looking for another parent. I had everything I needed in you. But maybe there's something to learn from knowing him, even if it's just understanding where I came from. Denise nodded, fighting back tears. Her son had grown into a man with more wisdom and grace than she could have hoped for. Just promise me one thing, she said. Go slowly. Protect your heart. Anthony hugged her tight. I learned from the best. He pulled back with a small smile. Besides, he has a lot to prove. 21 years' worth. As the spring afternoon faded into evening, Denise sat at Anthony's piano, gently touching the keys that had given her son a voice, a future, and now, unexpectedly, a bridge to his past. There was no way to know what would come of this fragile new connection. Forgiveness might be possible someday, or it might not. But watching her son approach this challenge with such strength and openness had shown her once again that life's greatest compositions often come from its most difficult notes.